One word describes tonight's story. Swashbuckling adventure. Okay, I know that's 2 words, but you get what I'm on about here, don't you? Yes, so tonight I give you a little bit of everything you've been clamoring for. Lots of comments recently. Oh, let's do a story like this. Let's have a story like that. Well, tonight covers all the bases. It is magnificent, and I know you're going to love it. So, without further ado, here we go with Zombie Island by Margot Holloway. Part 1. Arrival. A dull grey cloud drifted quietly across the moon, like a shroud slipping from the features of the long dead. It resembled a cold, glowing face, albeit one with its eyes gouged out. Pale yellow light spilled onto the still, oily sea, reaching toward a low-lying bank of fog. The light pierced the dense mist like frozen golden fingers. Isadora Quinn shivered and pressed herself closer to Sterling Radcliffe's strong frame. It's terrifying, Sterling, she muttered. Terrifying. Sterling leaned against the yacht's railing, laughing softly. You've had one too many cocktails, that's all. It's made you jittery. Hey, listen. Faint dance music drifted up from the salon, along with a rhythmic shuffle of dancing feet. A luxury yacht, Caribbean moon, bunch of our closest friends, live music dancing, oh, and a little old me. You call it terrifying? His arms tightened around her, the teasing tone leaving his voice. I'm crazy about you, Izzy, and this night is just perfect. She tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow. It's the moon, Sterling. I guess I've never seen it like that before. Look, something's going to happen, something awful. I can just feel it. Oh, come on, Izzy, don't be dramatic. There was a hint of frustration in Sterling's deep voice. A stunning woman in his arms, dark hair, darker eyes, and a setting made for romance. And she was rambling on about ominous feelings because the moon looked weird. She pulled away from him and looked out over the water. I know it sounds ridiculous, but... Her voice stopped short, her body going rigid. Sterling, look! Radcliffe spun around, and as he stared, his throat went dry. Out of the fog bank into the moonlight emerged a strange, ghostly vessel. Its decayed timbers were blackened and rotting with impossible age. To be honest, it looked like the corpse of a ship, risen from the sea's grave. Its prow curved upward like a backward scimitar, hanging over the skeletal remains of a cabin, with its seaward sides made from the bow itself. From a shallow pit at midship jutted the broken stump of a mast, its jagged end pointing to the pale watching moon. The stern, thick with the crust of time, arched above a strange elevated poop deck, beneath which lay another cabin. Along each side of the worm-eaten hull ran a series of oblong openings, like old portholes. From each of these protruded massive oars, long, clumsy things, as black and weathered as the rest of this ancient hulk. Then a sound drifted across the water, a steady rhythmic drumbeat, the beat keeping time for the rowers. Its hollow thud seemed to stop the heart, then force it to pound along with its slow, relentless rhythm. Ghostly fingers, soaked in dread, crawled up Radcliffe's spine. With stiff lips, Isadora whispered, "What is that?" Sterling responded in a dry, raspy voice, the words catching like they didn't want to be spoken. It can't be. For God's sake, but it's a galley. A ship from the time of Alexander the Great. What the hell is it doing here, now? The ancient vessel drew closer, gliding along the moonlit path across the sea. Foamy brine curled away from its swelling prow as it came nearer, its course set to cross that of the Nostromo. And then they saw its crew. They gasped, the blood draining from their faces. Figures of ancient Persia, men dressed in leather tunics and rusted armor, and they were grotesque. In the sickly yellow moonlight, Sterling could make out them clearly now. The lookout standing still as a statue at the bow, the helmsman on the high rear deck, the drummer crouched beside the broken mast, the rowers packed in the central pit. And all of them, every single one, was ghostly pale, their faces bloated, wrinkled, and swollen like bodies left underwater for far too long. Dead men. Men whose stiff, jerky movements betrayed the lifelessness in their eyes. Men who should not have been able to move at all. But there they were. And they moved. A strange mirage, isn't it? Said a smooth, hollow voice behind them. Isadora gasped at the sudden interruption, and they both spun around. Just a foot away stood the tall, lean figure of the Nostromo's captain, Lucien Morvan. A strange smile twisted across his thin lips. "Hey, what's the big idea sneaking up on us like that?" Radcliffe snapped. He'd never liked Morvan, not from the first moment the man had approached him about selling him the yacht. But the price had been right, even for the son of a billionaire, and as part of the deal, Morvan had stayed on as captain. The tall man didn't flinch. His smile stayed fixed as he gave a formal nod. "Apologies, sir. I walk softly. Just a habit, I suppose." He gestured toward the ancient galley. "It looks almost real, doesn't it?" "Real?" Sterling muttered, turning his eyes back to the black ship. "Looks dead. Is this some part of an elaborate tourist excursion?" Morvan offered no reply, just that same cryptic smile. It was almost there now, veering sharply to draw alongside the Nostromo. The drum suddenly went silent. The long oars slipped to a halt, resting in the sea, swaying only slightly with the waves. A foul ancient stench drifted toward them, thick and rotten, like something exhaled from a sealed tomb. The music and drunken dancing of their friends below deck had stopped now, and a heavy, fearful silence fell over the yacht. Isadora pressed close, pulling Sterling's arm around her shoulders. He looked at Morvan, who stood completely still, watching. "Do something, Morvan," Sterling barked. "Don't just stand there." The captain gave a small nod, and that same unsettling smile was still on his lips. And his hand slipped into his jacket and came out with something strange. An odd-looking instrument made of 4 twisted silver cones bound together with silver cords. He lifted it to his mouth. His eyes narrowed to slits, and behind them, his eyes glowed like coals. A single note rolled out over the sea, deep, hollow, and full of eerie, discordant wails. It sounded like a summons, but also like a warning. Oh, the moan was hideous, like the death cry of something inhuman. It cut deep, dragging claws of terror through the heart. It rose, fell, and rose again, and as it faded, the crew of the ancient galley began to move. In unison, they swarmed to the yacht's rail, silent, unnatural, their dead faces gleaming in the moonlight. Sterling spun around to Morvan, rage bursting through him, albeit rage laced with a fear he couldn't shake. His fist shot out, aiming for that gleaming silver instrument and the smug face behind it. But Morvan moved like smoke, gracefully, ghostly, still wearing that fixed, unsettling smile. The strange horn rose again to his lips. Sterling cursed and then lunged. His hand clamped onto Morvan's bony shoulder, and immediately fingers like iron hooks closed around his throat. Gasping, Sterling twisted, smashing a fist into Morvan's face. The captain reeled back, stumbled, and crashed hard onto the deck. And then Isadora screamed. Sterling whirled around. 2 of the things from the galley, those bloated, flabby-faced horrors, were dragging her back. He charged at them, his fists pounding, but then his hand sank right into one of them, into flesh that was cold, spongy, and gave way too easily, like he was punching something rotted. Disgusted, he struck again, but then an arm wrapped around him, a pale skeletal limb with the strength of a coiled serpent, and its touch was corpse cold. A face, drowned and featureless, loomed close, its eyes void of anything human. More arms clutched at his legs. Sterling fought with every ounce of strength and growing panic, but it wasn't enough. They lifted him up, dragged him to the rail, and then over it. He landed hard on the galley's rotting deck. The wood was slick and foul beneath him. Numbness crept in, first in his limbs, then spreading. Like poison, it moved inward from the grip of those icy hands. Oh, his muscles slowed and then stopped. Only his eyes still moved, stiffly as if they were freezing. He found Isadora in his field of vision. The creatures had held her aloft, her body limp, her hair spilling down like dark ribbons in the moonlight as they climbed over the Nostromo's rail. Then she vanished from view, swallowed by the dark. The galley's interior was like a crypt. They dumped Sterling onto the spongy, reeking floor of a dank cabin. For a moment he saw their pale forms silhouetted in the doorway, and then they were gone, leaving only silence and shadow. He lay there, paralyzed and yet hyper-aware. His heart pounded. His mind fought for reason, but nothing made sense. This couldn't be happening. Any second now he'd wake up. Any second... But he didn't. From the Nostromo he heard chaos, screams, shouts, and rising panic. Thick with terror. And then more shadows appeared, and Isadora was thrown beside him like a rag doll, her body stiff, unmoving. Something inside Sterling snapped then. Oh, he had to move, had to break free. He forced every muscle to obey, sweat bursting from his skin as his neck veins bulged. It felt like trying to lift a mountain with his will alone. Then something gave, like cords breaking, and suddenly he was free. Sterling quickly crawled over to Isadora, cradling her, rubbing her wrists, whispering her name. That was when he heard it again, the silver horn. But this time the sound was different. No longer a summoning, no. It was a low, droning murmur, languid, slow, like the hum of sleep itself. It seemed to seep into his ears, wrapping itself around his nerves, tugging gently at his mind. Every thought slowed. His arms drooped, his eyelids wavered. He pressed his hands to his ears then, gritted his teeth, kept his eyes wide open, but still it pulled at him, dulled his senses, pulling him downward, inward. And then, suddenly, silence. The droning had stopped. Sterling's head cleared instantly, the fog of that infernal drone lifting like mist in the sun. He turned to Isadora. Her arm was limp in his hand, telling him she'd moved from paralysis into a deep, unnatural sleep. He shook her gently. No response. But at least her breathing was calm and steady. At that moment, a sudden silence struck him. The Nostromo. All of the noise from the yacht had gone dead quiet. He stood and crept toward the square of moonlight spilling through the door. Just as he stepped away from it, he froze. Footsteps. There was a faint clink of armor, and Sterling shrank back, his heart racing. Through the gloom, he glimpsed a figure, metal-helmeted, spectral, hauling itself over the yacht's rail like a knight risen from the grave. Moving as fast and silent as he could, Sterling dropped back beside Isadora. His eyes were now narrowed to slits. One by one, the crew of the galley returned, bearing the limp, sleeping bodies of his friends. They brought them from the Nostromo, dragging them through the doorway, laying them side by side like offerings before some ancient altar. Sterling watched, unmoving, his every nerve on edge. All came aboard except Morvan. The drowned rowers crept back to their stations. The oars dipped, and then the sound returned. That hollow, measured throb of the drum. Low and awful, echoing through the belly of the galley. Creak of timbers, the soft hiss of the oars, stirring black water. The ship was moving. Sterling rose again and slipped to the doorway, peering out. The rowers' backs hunched and fell, slow and mechanical, as if being pulled by invisible strings. Beyond the stern, the Nostromo followed, dark and ghostlike, its engine muttering low, a single pale light flickering at its bow like a dying star. He turned back to Isadora, still numbed as to what was happening. Her face, so serene in sleep, so pale and still, stirred something primal in him, a fire and a fury. His hands were clenched, his jaw set. Morvan. That fucking name now rang in his skull like a bell of hate. But beyond Morvan, beyond even that silver horn, there was something worse. Them. The silent dead who rode this ancient ship through time. The ship itself, this sodden, rotting hulk that shouldn't exist in any sane world, sent another chill down his spine. There was more ahead, he felt it. Creeping certainty of some greater horror. Yes, he had to act now. Stepping carefully over the outstretched forms of his friends, Sterling crossed to the front wall of the cabin. Moonlight spilled through a narrow crack. He crouched, touched the boards, and recoiled. Well, the wood was wet, not with seawater, but with something colder, fouler. It felt like dead skin, frozen, decayed. He leaned in and peered through the gap, and saw it. There's a silhouette on the horizon, black and shapeless, a crouching mass that defied definition. An island, yes, but one that watched, one that waited. It rose from the sea like a coiled beast, ready to pounce. Around it, the very moonlight faltered, as though even the heavens shrank away from touching it. Sterling stared, and as he did, the island came closer and closer. They were heading straight for a towering cliff of black basalt that loomed over the sea like the face of doom itself. As the galley approached, Sterling's breath caught in his throat. The cliff wasn't just rock. It was a skull. A monstrous, time-worn skull shaped by nature's cruel hand, its rounded crown scarred by time, its cavernous eye sockets hollowed by relentless surf, and its nasal cavity a black void gaping open like the maw of some long-dead titan. The cliff ended high above the waterline, but beneath that jagged brow yawned a vast, chasm-like opening. A mouth. And the galley, now eerily silent, drum stilled, oars frozen mid-air, drifted straight into it. Into the mouth of the skull. Just before they were swallowed by total blackness, Sterling sprang to Isadora's side. Her body was limp, unresponsive. If he was going to act, it had to be now. So with a grunt, he lifted her into his arms and stumbled forward, groping toward the starboard bow. His hand brushed the galley's hull, wet, warped, and reeking of ancient rot. Desperately, he felt along its surface, probing every seam, until his fingers found a weak spot, where two boards had begun to peel apart. He laid Isadora down gently, then seized the edge with both hands, and heaved. With a sickening crack, the rotten timber split. A chunk broke loose and fell away, vanishing into the unseen water below. Sterling clawed at the next, prying and pulling. In seconds, a jagged opening yawned before him. He leaned out. Nothing. Just void. Then, faint but growing, came the whisper of the Nostromo's motors, and a pale light slid over the water. The yacht was entering the cave. The hum died quickly, but the glow remained, diffused and ghostly in the subterranean dark. Now he saw it. Black water below, with a sheer wall of rocks beyond. He jerked back. There were footsteps above. Someone or something was moving on deck. If the rowers returned, it would all be over. He knew he had one chance. It was now or never. Stooping down, he cradled Isadora in one arm, and with the other he grabbed the edge of the torn hull and hauled himself through the gap. One deep breath, and then he dropped into the watery abyss. They plunged. Icy water enveloped them like the fingers of the grave. Down they sank, and then up, shooting to the surface like corks. Sterling broke the water, gasping for breath. A blow smashed the side of his skull. The oars! He'd risen right beneath them. His limbs turned to lead. He kicked, clawed, desperate to stay afloat. Somewhere in the dark, Isadora was slipping from his grasp, slipping away from him like a ghost into the deep. And in his last flicker of awareness, she changed. She'd become one of them, pale, empty, drowned. Then his body struck something. Rock. His cheek scraped stone, and everything turned to darkness. Not the darkness of night. No. More like a final darkness. Part 2. The Island of Dread. It felt like red-hot iron rods were being driven right into his skull. Sterling groaned as he clawed his way back from the abyss of unconsciousness. His eyes flickered open, only to be swallowed again by unrelenting blackness. Pain twisted through his head like barbed wire, birthing phantoms in the void. Grotesque shapes moved behind his eyes, spawned by his shattered thoughts. His body was half submerged in the chill, briny water, his head resting against a jagged outcrop that jutted up like the tooth of some long-dead leviathan. He stirred and gasped, and slowly, like a wounded beast, he rose to his hands and knees. His wet clothes clung to his skin, and the sea tugged at his limbs with cold, invisible fingers. His head lolled, his mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before words came to him. Something had hit him, a blow sudden and brutal, and then darkness. Now he was in the water, alone, sightless. The memories then returned in fitful spasms. Isadora. And a groan escaped his lips. Yes, he remembered the fall, the plunge, the cold, and then the oars. That savage, blinding strike. Oh, he'd lost her. He was sure of it. She'd slipped from his arms, from this world. She was gone. She could be floating out there by now, somewhere in the gloom, her lifeless eyes wide and staring into the black void above. "Izzy!" he cried out, voice ragged with anguish. "Isadora!" Only silence answered. No, not silence, more of a cruel echo, bouncing mockingly off the cavern walls. There was no ripple of waves, no stirring breeze, no sound of life at all, only the oppressive stillness of a place that had forgotten time. Sterling pressed his palms hard against his skull, as though he could crush the pain into silence, but it throbbed, relentless, and worse than the pain was the helplessness, the maddening impotence that threatened to crack his mind wide open. At that moment he teetered on the edge of delirium. Oh, he could almost hear her voice, almost feel her breath. If he didn't act now, madness would surely take him. With a growl, half sob, half scream, he forced himself to move. He rose unsteadily, his soaked boots slipping on the slick stone. He stumbled away from the water's edge, hands outstretched like a blind man. His fingers brushed against a wall, slick, pockmarked, carved by centuries of waves, and he followed it, inch by inch, step by painful step. Only one thought pulsed in his mind, a desperate mantra. Light. I must find light. Without it, he could never find her. Time passed. He couldn't say how much. The pain dulled, faded to a steady throb. Strength crept slowly back into his limbs. Then, just as despair was beginning to close its claws around his throat, he saw it. A dim glow. Oh, a pale, leprous light seeping from a narrow fissure in the rock. Sterling quickened his steps, rounded the bend, and froze. Before him stretched a plain, bathed in the ghastly sheen of a dead moon. The light was sickly, like that of fungus growing on old corpses. The air turned colder, but the shiver that ran down his spine wasn't from the breeze. It was from something deeper, something very wrong. This place, whatever it was not of the rational world he knew. No, he'd entered the threshold of nightmares. Grim and harshly forbidding, the plain stretched out before him, dead as the frozen wilderness of the moon. Once, perhaps, life had flourished here, but now the only bleached skeletons of trees remained, their brittle limbs raised like desperate skeletal hands clawing at an indifferent sky. Some trees lay fallen, toppled by the savage winds of long-gone hurricanes. Their trunks, aged and blackened by time, sprawled across the ground like the dismembered bones of some colossal, forgotten beast. The hoarfrost, painted by the cruel brushes of moonlight, turned them into ghostly relics. A moaning wind stirred weakly through the dead forest, and the shadows cast by the trees were not shadows at all. No, they moved. They writhed like monstrous creatures with too many arms, slithering over this barren earth. Sterling's eyes, drawn by some force beyond his will, moved beyond the dead wood, and there, across the desolation, he saw it. A faint glow, dim but unmistakable. Pale squares of light, high in the walls of what could only be an ancient black castle. A castle? Sterling's mind reeled. His frown deepened as he stared at the spires that curved and twisted like the horns of some demonic entity reaching up into the sky, thin as needles, cruel as the teeth of a beast. He squinted, uncertain of what he was doing, but there was no mistaking it. The castle was real. With a sense of urgency, Sterling stepped away from the wall of stone and glanced down the serpentine path that twisted through the forest. His eyes scanned the ground, and then he froze, a low cry of disbelief slipping from his lips. What? There, on a smooth, flat stone, a single glistening spot of water, perfectly round, shimmered beneath the pale light of the moon. The shape of it was unmistakable. A woman's shoe, the damp mark left by someone who'd passed this way. Isadora. She'd been here. Then doubt crept back in like a shadow. Could it have been another woman from the Nostromo? His mind raced. No, it couldn't be. They'd fallen, they'd dropped. No one else could have passed this way without being drenched from the sea, their feet soaked through. This mark, this was Isadora's. With all the determination of a bloodhound on a trail, Sterling's body tensed and he ran, his legs pumping like pistons. The wind howled above him, and the twisted branches of the dead forest seemed to whisper warnings, their boughs groaning in the gale. But he pressed on, his eyes sharp, constantly searching for the faintest clue, the smallest sign of Isadora's path. A drop of water here, another there, little marks that the full moon's sickly light made visible. He followed them with a hunter's focus, his heart hammering in his chest. Soon the dead forest began to thin, the trees becoming less frequent, and the ground underfoot harder. He was nearing the castle. The trail had become increasingly faint, but it was still there, like a fragile thread leading him onward. It brought him to a narrow stone stairway, winding crookedly upward to an opening in the castle's black wall. A faint lurid glow pulsed from deep within the castle's bowels, and as Sterling moved closer, a sound, horrible, obscene, rippled through the air. A wheezing, croaking moan, like the growl of a demonic organ, echoing from the depths, a dirge of unnatural sorrow. Sterling's hair stood on end, and the breath caught in his throat. He stopped dead, his pulse racing, the hairs at the back of his neck prickling. The noise, a sound that chilled his very soul, was coming from inside that accursed place. He could feel the malevolent presence of something ancient, something utterly wrong, thrumming in the air. He turned his attention to the steps, searching for more signs of Isadora. There on the second step, hey, what was that? A blotch of moisture. Irregular, not just a drop, no, it was larger, as if something or someone had paused here, leaving behind a trace. He crouched, staring at it, heart pounding in his chest. Had Isadora stopped here? Had she ascended the steps, entered this cursed place? Well, the answer was as elusive as the shadows around him, but Sterling's instinct screamed at him. Yeah, she was here, and he had to follow. With a drawn face, Sterling began to circle the base of the black castle, searching every shadowed nook and cranny, his eye scanning the bare, weathered walls. His heart, heavy and full of dread, felt like an anchor dragging him deeper into the pit of despair. Oh, if something had lured Isadora into that demon-infested vault. Well, the thought gnawed away at him, but he shoved it aside, refusing to let fear take hold of his mind. He cursed suddenly, realizing what he was doing. In his frantic search, his pace had unknowingly fallen into rhythm with the eerie dirge drifting from the castle's depths. The grotesque, wheezing moans seemed to seep into his soul, twisting his every step with a sense of impending doom. He had to focus, had to find her. He altered his pace, moving now with greater purpose. As he rounded a corner at the rear of the structure, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow outlined against the sky. His heart leapt in his chest. Someone was there, crouching on a ledge below one of the windows. Sterling's breath caught in his throat, and then, as though the very air shifted with him, he called out, "Isadora!" The figure above stirred, its outline shifting in the dim moonlight. It looked down at him, and then, in a fluid, almost desperate motion, it descended the stone face of the castle. As the figure dropped to the ground, Sterling could barely contain the rush of relief that surged through him. It was Isadora. She stood before him, her black hair hanging in matted strands around her face. Her skin was pale, her eyes wide with terror of something too awful to speak. Her wet clothing clung to her body, revealing her form in the eerie moonlight. But it was the fear in her eyes that struck Sterling the hardest. "Oh, Sterling," she gasped, her voice cracked, as though it had been ripped from her throat. "Thank God! Oh, thank God!" Without hesitation, she threw herself into his arms, her body trembling uncontrollably, her face pressed against his shoulder. Sterling held her tight, feeling the warmth of her body against him, the weight of her full fear. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They only sound the steady rhythm of their breathing. Then, slowly, the tension in her body began to subside, and she pulled back, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. I guess I can't take it," she whispered, a fragile smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Sterling shook his head solemnly, his voice quiet but firm. "Oh, you're a game girl, Isadora. You've got nerve enough for two men. But if you can, then tell me what happened. Or if you need to wait, just say so." Isadora hesitated, her eyes distant for a moment, as though replaying the horrors in her mind. Then she exhaled, as if the simple act of speaking the words would unburden her. "I feel I'd better get it off my chest," she said softly. "You probably saw those things carry me from the yacht." Sterling nodded grimly. "Well, I was paralyzed with fear when they dropped me into that terrible boat. Yeah, I remember you tried to wake me up. You get me to move. Then that horn blew and it was just like, I don't know, I floated away. I felt like I was drowning in an ocean of sleep." Her voice faltered then, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "After that, I remember nothing, till I woke up with water filling my eyes, my nose and my mouth. It was choking me. Someone's arms were around me. It must have been you. Oh, Sterling, but then they weren't there anymore and I panicked. I don't even know how I made it to the shore, but I did. I lay there near the galley, choking and gagging, but I was too scared to cough. It wasn't completely dark, and I could see those dreadful things. Oh, they were carrying people, bodies, on their shoulders, moving along a narrow ledge near the water, heading inland." Isadora's voice broke then, a sob escaping her throat. She shuddered, and Sterling tightened his grip on her. I thought maybe you were one of those limp bodies," she whispered, her words trembling, "and I almost died of fright. But after a while, the last one was gone and the light went out. Then I heard another pair of feet moving over the rocks. It was more Van, I think. The sound, it died and then I was alone." Her words trailed off into the chilling silence of the night. The weight of what she'd endured hung heavy between them, but there was no time to dwell on it. Sterling knew that whatever horrors they'd faced, whatever nightmares had unfolded in the castle, they were far from over. "That place was awful, Sterling," Isadora murmured, her voice shaking. "Oh, the blackness almost drove me mad. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid to. It was like some terrible weight was crushing my lungs, and I couldn't breathe. I knew if I followed those undead things, they might capture me, but it seemed worse to stay there in that dreadful dark." Her voice faltered now, the memory of the suffocating blackness still haunting her. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling tightly into fists. "I got out of there somehow. I don't know how, but it felt like it took hours. Then I didn't know what to do. I stood at the edge of the dead forest, just trying to decide, trying also to keep myself from shrieking and running, just running anywhere far from there." She paused here, her eyes distant as if seeing the nightmare once more. Oh, then Morvan's horn blew again. God, Sterling, it was worse than anything I've ever heard. That sound, it was wicked, like it promised to fulfill every foul desire that ever tainted a human mind. It repelled me, but at the same time, it lured me. And I answered. Isadora's breath caught in her throat. She buried her face in her trembling hands, as though trying to shut out the memory. After a moment, she lowered them slowly, her eyes filled with the weight of what she had endured. And the sound stopped, and just as I found myself crawling on hands and knees up the stone stairway on the other side, she continued in a hoarse whisper. Then another sound started, that awful groaning, that music. It didn't draw me in, though. No, I ran down the steps as fast as I could, like a rabbit trying to find a place to hide. Her shoulders shook, and she looked at him with desperation. After a while, I thought maybe you were inside. I came back, climbed up to the window to look for you. And, oh, Sterling, it's hellish. Sterling's gaze hardened, but he said nothing for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Isadora's face was drawn tight with terror, and the look in her eyes made him hesitate. It was the same rigid fear he'd seen when he first found her, the same dread that now twisted in the pit of his own stomach. We could go back to the cove and get away on the Nostromo, Isadora, Sterling said, his voice low and steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. And if you think we should, we will. But, He hesitated, glancing toward the looming dark silhouette of the castle. I brought our friends here, and I want to get them out if I can. Isadora looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and a quiet, reluctant determination. She nodded slowly. Her lips were trembling. Of course. We can't do anything else. Sterling released her from his embrace and stepped toward the wall, his mind made up. I'm going to see what's going on in there, he said firmly. You wait here till I come down. But Isadora gripped his arm, panic flashing in her eyes. No, Sterling, no. I couldn't stand waiting here alone. I'm going to go with you. He looked down at her, seeing the fear in her eyes, but he understood. With a soft sigh, he nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. All right, then. Let's go together. They both turned to the castle, the dark structure looming like a shadowy titan against the night sky. Sterling led the way as they began to climb the steep, craggy wall, each movement calculated, each hand and foot finding its place in the jagged natural steps of the rock. The climb was slow but steady. The air was thin and cold as they made their way upward. The wall seemed to stretch endlessly, but soon they reached a wide stone ledge, just enough for both of them. They crouched down, gripping onto the thin, rusted bars that jutted outside from the castle's broken windows. From their perch, they could see the blackened interior of the castle, an abyss of shadow and foreboding silence. Sterling and Isadora sat in the eerie stillness. Their hearts were racing, the moonlight reflecting across the ruined stones. They both stared into the darkness within the castle, knowing that whatever lay ahead would be even worse than the terror they'd already faced. Part 3. The Steps of Torture. A gigantic hall stretched out before them, its dark, towering walls rising into an arched ceiling so high it seemed to vanish into the blackness. Beneath their window, directly below, a stone platform jutted from the wall, spanning away across the chamber. At the center of the platform, a stone altar squatted like some grotesque relic of ancient rites, a strange phosphorescent fire smoldering on top, casting a sickly glow on the scene below. And descending from the altar, wide and ominous, was a stairway, its steps winding down into the heart of the hall, where death seemed to be waiting. Sterling's gaze swept over the chamber, taking it all in with a single glance. The size of the hall, the strange altar, the fire, and then the figures standing behind it. His eyes lingered only for a moment on the sight of the stone stairs before fixing on the unimaginable horror unfolding below. 5 massive figures stood behind the altar, their cloaks long and hooded, the scarlet fabric contrasting sharply with the darkness of the castle. The central figure, taller and more imposing than the others, raised his arms wide, his cloak spreading out like the wings of a monstrous bird of prey. From his lips came a guttural chant, a blasphemous incantation in archaic Latin, blending with the low, wheezing sound of a buried organ, its notes vibrating through the stone. For a moment his arms dropped and the chanting ceased. From below came a rising sound, a collective whine of devotion, hollow and hungry, a wail of the undead, like a call for blood. It echoed up the stairs, the desperate cry of those who had once been human but were now something far worse. Sterling's eyes roved over the eerie procession, 100 or more figures, all strangely attired in costumes from different eras and places. Men in the armor of medieval Persia, sailors from a black galley, yellow-haired Vikings, hawk-faced Egyptians, half-naked islanders, red-sashed pirates from the Spanish Main, and even men from the present day. Each figure was unmistakably human, yet the air around them hung thick with death, an aura of decay that clung to them like the dampness of a tombstone. And among them, at the foot of the stairs, stood his friends from the Nostromo, stripped of all clothing, frozen in place, statuesque and unmoving. Their bodies were waxen and stiff, their eyes wide with terror, yet their limbs refused to move. 3 others lay prone before the altar, their bodies naked and lifeless. At the end of the hall, right at the very end, Sterling caught sight of Lucien Morvan, draped in his unbroken black cloak, his face obscured by shadows. A glint of silver caught the dim light in his hand. The horn, yes, the same horn that had called them here, sending out its drugging sound to control and manipulate. Morvan's gaze was fixed on the altar, on the scene unfolding in front of him, a conductor overseeing his dark orchestra. Then, as if on command, a girl detached herself from the motionless crowd. Sterling's heart lurched. Oh, it was Anne. She'd once been the vivacious, playful spirit of their yacht party, but now she was something else. The terror in her face was inescapable, her eyes wide and unblinking, her body rigid in a semi-stupor. She was naked, her skin glowing unnaturally in the dim light, and her legs moved with an almost mechanical precision, as if they were being controlled by forces beyond her will. A little catch step, forced and unnatural, propelled her upward, the rhythm matching the creepy, moaning chant of the organ. As she climbed, Sterling's eyes followed her every move. She reached the first of the undead, and Sterling saw the flash of a blade, a gleam of silver that cut into her flesh. A crimson gash appeared on her thigh, and without hesitation one of the undead figures stepped forward, its lips pressed against her wound. The blood flowed darkly from the gash, and the creature drank greedily, its eyes gleaming with a hunger that could never be sated. But Anne moved on, her pace unbroken, the blood still staining her pale skin. Another figure stepped forward, another flash of silver and another wound. More blood, more drink. The undead feasted, but Anne's pace never faltered. She climbed the stairs like a puppet on invisible strings, bound to some dark force that compelled her to continue. She reached the top of the stairs, and her body was now slick with blood. She sank down onto the altar. The figure in the red cloak moved toward her then, stooping to lift up her limp body. With a brutal snarl, he buried his long, sharp teeth into her throat, drinking deeply from her lifeblood. Sterling's heart stilled. His own face was drained of color as he watched, horrified. This figure, some kind of vampire, was no mere undead creature. No, this was something far worse, something ancient, something drenched in the lust and cruelty of hell itself. The figure released her, and she sank down beside the others, her body lifeless and pale. Sterling's hands clenched into fists, his mind reeling with disbelief and fury. They'd come here to rescue their friends, to fight back against the horror that gripped this place. Now he realized the true extent of the nightmare they faced. It wasn't just a castle filled with the undead. It was a realm of unimaginable darkness, where even the living were doomed to be consumed, one drop of blood at a time. Another began the hellish climb, a giant of a man with a thickly muscled torso. Sterling knew him instantly, and his heart seemed to stop. Mike Lovering. Oh, they played football together, shared the field, shared victories and defeats. Brave man, fighter. But now he was nothing more than a puppet, stumbling up the stairs with that same stiff, unnatural step, the same glazed fear in his eyes. The sight crushed Sterling's chest. Mike, strong, defiant Mike, had become a prisoner to this hell? How? How could something so evil hold such power over men like him? Sterling's thoughts churned in terror and helplessness. What could he do against a force like that? What had it done to Michael Overing? Sterling's throat went dry as dust, the saliva clinging to his parched tongue. He wanted to turn to Isadora, wanted to comfort her or say something, anything, but his body refused to obey. He was frozen, unable to tear his eyes from the awful spectacle unfolding before him. Up the stone steps, Lovering climbed, without hesitation, without resistance, moving as though controlled by unseen strings. There was no blade flashing toward him, no undead hands reaching out to drink his blood. Instead, he climbed, stoically, methodically, until he paused just before the altar, his body obedient, his head bent back, his throat exposed. Sterling wanted to scream, to do something, but the terror held him in place. He just couldn't look away. Mercifully, he regained enough control to close his eyes, to shut out the nightmare for just a moment. But it didn't last long. He heard a gasp from Isadora and opened his eyes just in time to see the vampire, that thing, lift the limp body of Les Stark from the altar. With a brutal, uncaring motion, the vampire hurled Stark's body away from him, sending it crashing to the stone steps with a sickening thud. The body rolled and tumbled, spinning violently down the stairs, twisting and contorting unnaturally as it hit the cold stone floor with a final, dreadful thud. Sterling's stomach churned. Michael Overing was dead, flung aside like a discarded doll. And then another began the slow, tortured climb. The night stretched on forever. Sterling and Isadora remained motionless, crouched in their cramped hiding spot, eyes locked on the scene below, unable to look away. The horror repeated itself over and over. Each new victim climbed those stairs, like the ones before them, their faces pale with terror, their bodies moving in robotic steps, each one closer to their death. Sterling's senses began to dull, as though the sheer monotony of the endless procession was seeping into his mind. He felt as if he might lose his grip on reality itself. The endless climbing, the bloodshed, the sounds, the wails of the undead and the organ's cursed melody, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. His eyes burned from staring for so long. His throat was parched, dry like sand. Hours passed, yet still the climbing continued. One by one the victims were claimed, and each body that reached the altar added to the growing pile of twisted, lifeless forms. Finally, the last of the victims climbed the stairs, her body falling lifeless onto the altar like the others before her. The endless, mind-numbing horror of it all seemed to dissipate, like the end of a storm. Sterling's body, still tense with fear, began to relax ever so slightly, but the terror, its grip, never fully left. Stiffly, Sterling turned his head, forcing his aching neck to move. He glanced over his shoulder, squinting into the dim light. A faint grey tinge had begun to rim the horizon, the first hint of daylight breaking over the sea. Almost daylight, he whispered hoarsely, his voice raw from hours of silent terror. Isadora nodded slowly, her gaze still locked on the chamber below, her eyes glassy with exhaustion and shock. She didn't seem to hear him, or perhaps she couldn't tear herself away from the nightmare, from the things they'd just witnessed. Sterling followed her gaze, his heart sinking as he saw Morvan, still standing near the far wall like some dark sentinel. The cloak of the blackest midnight enveloped him, his face hidden in shadow, his eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory light. Then Morvan raised the four-piped horn to his lips once more. The fourth note of that haunting, infernal melody filled the air, creeping through the chamber, its discordant sound curling around Sterling's spine like a tangible force. It was a signal, a command, a call to whatever dark power governed this hellish place. And as the sound echoed, Sterling knew that the nightmare was far from over. It was a doleful sound, cry like the cry death itself might possess, and yet, oddly and horribly, it was soothing, promising the peace of endless sleep. The sound curled around Sterling's senses, a soft, irresistible pull. He felt it deep in his bones, a beckoning call to surrender to the silence, to the dark promise of eternal rest. And as the note echoed through the chamber, the undead reacted. The columns of reanimated bodies, once stiff and rigid, began to thin, their forms becoming like wraiths, dissolving into nothingness. They flowed like water down the stone steps, vanishing into the shadows. The 5 vampires, draped in their crimson cowls, paused, unease flickering in their eyes. The first hints of dawn were creeping across the room, casting shadows under the roof. Sterling could feel their thoughts, a collective understanding among them. Before sunrise, they must retreat to their tombs beneath the castle. There they would sleep until another nightfall. Without a word, they moved together, striding past Morvan, who had lowered himself to the stone floor in a reverent posture. They entered the black opening in the wall and disappeared from view. With their departure, the altar's fire dimmed to a mere ember, leaving the chamber in an eerie twilight. Morvan slowly rose to his feet. He stood alone now, the only movement coming from the broken, twisted body of the last victim at the foot of the stairs. The room felt empty, save for the silent presence of those half alive, their bodies stretched out in an unnatural stillness before the altar. Sterling knew this was the moment. This was the time to strike, to get in there, to confront Morvan, to rescue Isadora and their friends. But even as the thought came to him, he remained frozen, unable to move. Morvan raised the silver horn once again, the sound cutting through the air. It was different this time. Fainter, but still powerful, and still calling. Sterling's mind struggled to process the sound, but Isadora's faint cry pierced through his fog of confusion. The luring note, he realized hazily, had called her too. And as the note echoed, it wrapped itself around Sterling's senses, promising him everything he could ever desire. Earth and its dominion, his for the taking, if he answered that call. But even as the lure of power surged through him, he saw the half-dead creatures stirring, and the sight of their movement steadied his faltering mind. One by one they began to rise. Some could only reach their knees, their limbs trembling, while others staggered to unsteady feet. They moved in a slow, deliberate march towards Morvan, answering his summons. Their pallid forms seemed like the freshly risen from their graves, their eyes devoid of life but still full of obedience to Morvan's command. The note continued, insistent, drawing them toward him. And then Sterling saw Isadora. She wasn't beside him. She was far below, moving with terrifying speed and daring, leaping from rock to rock, a blur of motion as she made her way toward Morvan. Well, the realization hit Sterling like a thunderclap. No, he couldn't let her go to him, to Morvan. She was walking straight into the heart of darkness. God, he had to stop her. With a sudden burst of energy, Sterling swung around, ignoring the stiff aches in his legs. He started to descend the steep wall, moving quickly and recklessly. The sound of Morvan's horn note faded behind him, but its pull was still there, lingering, trying to weaken his resolve. He pushed on, down, ignoring the voice that called to him. He saw Isadora now, near the base of the castle, dashing around a corner closer to Morvan's dark influence. Sterling cursed under his breath, redoubling his speed. He pushed himself harder, faster, and then disaster struck. The ancient rock crumbled beneath his feet. For a moment his fingers scraped desperately for purchase, clinging to the loose stone. His heart raced, and then, with a sudden crushing fall, he dropped. His body hit the ground with a violent smash. A jagged stone slid beneath him, and in an instant his head collided with the unforgiving castle wall. Pain exploded through his skull, fiery and relentless, and for a moment everything blurred, the world spinning in a dark haze. His body felt heavy, the blood pounding in his ears. Through the suffocating fog of pain, one thought flashed in his mind. Isadora. She was too close to Morvan. But the mist thickened, blackened, till it swallowed him whole. Part 4. In Morvan's Hands. Sterling awoke to the harsh brightness of the sun glaring down on his face. His eyes snapped open, and 1,000 stabbing lances of light pierced his skull. For a brief agonizing moment he was blinded, the sun's rays overwhelming him. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to shield himself, struggling to push himself upright. A sick feeling churned in his stomach, and the back of his head throbbed relentlessly. His fingers brushed over the tender spot, and a sharp wince passed through him. A lump, like an egg, had swollen beneath his scalp, sticky with blood. His senses were disoriented, but he forced himself to stand, weaving unsteadily from side to side. Oh, Isadora. The memory surged back to him, and he groaned in despair. She'd been racing towards Morvan, drawn by the call of his damned horn. But now it was daylight. The sun had risen at least an hour ago. An hour, and Isadora was still gone. Sterling shook his head violently to clear the lingering fog, gritting his teeth against the pain in his skull. He took a few unsteady steps forward, each one sending a jolt through his body. He pressed on, refusing to stop. As he rounded the corner of the castle and strode toward the crooked stairs, the land before him seemed to reel, dizzying and disorienting. With every step, the pain in his head began to dull to a faint throb. His legs grew stronger with each motion. The castle loomed before him, its gloom seeping into his bones. He moved through it cautiously, every sense stretched tight like a wire. He cast a quick glance around the area and saw the body of Lovering where it had fallen. Sterling didn't even bother to examine it. There was no life left there, only the lifeless shell of a man who'd met a brutal end. His eyes swept upward, searching for the altar at the head of the stairs. A strange phosphorescent glow from the altar still lingered, casting eerie light upon the otherwise darkened room. Sterling's gaze lingered there for a moment before he moved on, grimly determined. His steps carried him toward a narrow doorway in the wall. He paused for a heartbeat, his muscles tensing in preparation. Stepping inside, he let his eyes adjust to the greater darkness. He found a narrow stairway leading downward, disappearing into a shadowy corridor. Somewhere far ahead, a faint light flickered in the depths, but the rest of the passage remained shrouded in obscurity. Sterling paused again, straining his ears for any sound. There was only silence. Couldn't hear a thing. Moving forward cautiously, he descended the stairs, each footstep echoing softly in the cold, damp stone. At the bottom, the corridor stretched out before him, its length uncertain in the dark. He moved silently, his breath steady, his mind focused. 100 feet ahead, the corridor split into two. At the junction, a torch had been thrust into the wall. Sterling's heart quickened with a sense of certainty. Morvan had to be nearby. Only a human would need light to navigate these passages. And that thought hardened his resolve. He knew he was getting close. He silently approached the fork in the passage. For a moment he hesitated, but then he chose the right path, where a faint glow beckoned him onward. The other passage descended deeper into darkness, black as the pits of hell, and he had no intention of venturing there. Well, not yet. As he moved down the passage, a doorway appeared ahead. His muscles tensed, and he clenched his fists in preparation for whatever might be inside. The flickering torchlight cast shadows across the stone, but there was no sound, no voices, no movement. Sterling peered cautiously into the small chamber beyond, and his breath caught in his throat. The sight before him was so pitiful, so horrifying that it froze him in place. Lying on the cold stone floor, huddled in small groups, were the passengers from the Nostromo. Their naked bodies lay still, unmoving. They were like broken dolls scattered across the chamber. Their faces, once full of life and individuality, now turned toward Radcliffe as he stood in the doorway. But there was no recognition in their eyes, no glimmer of thought, no flicker of life. Their vacant stares were wide, unblinking, empty, soulless. It was as if the essence of who they'd been had been drained from them, leaving only hollow shells. The life had been sucked from them, their very souls extinguished. The sight was enough to make Sterling's stomach turn. This wasn't just death. This was something far worse. Something had taken their humanity from them. He had to stop it. He had to save Isadora. But how? The thought was overwhelming. The magnitude of evil in Morvan's hands almost too much to comprehend. Sickened and enraged, Sterling turned away from the pitiful sight of the Nostromo's passengers, cursing his own helplessness to aid them. His fists once again clenched tight at his sides. He was shaking with fury. He cursed Lucien Morvan with a venom that seemed to burn through him. Morvan, who was responsible for their plight? Morvan. That fucking name burned through his mind, a symbol of everything that was wrong with this place. Black wrath of it gripped him as he moved on, his thoughts sharp and deadly. The corridor branched out again, but this time Sterling didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, staying to the right as instinct had told him. He was close now, so close. He could feel it in his bones. He had to reach her. But then a sound broke through his thoughts. A voice, hollow, empty. It was Morvan's voice. It came faintly, carried on the stale air from a room ahead. Sterling paused, his body tensing. He listened more intently. "And so, my dear," Morvan was saying, his voice dripping with dark amusement, "we entered into a pact with the, Master. A pact sealed with blood. In exchange for our lives, we three were to bring other humans to this island for the feasting of the dead alive. Every third month, each of us must return with our cargo when the moon is full. Since we come back on alternating months, they have a constant supply of fresh blood." Sterling's stomach churned. His hand shook with a violent rage. Every muscle in his body screamed for action. "Usually some of our captives live from full moon to full moon before they become like those of the galley, the undead. Some of these we waken when it suits our fancy. They are not like the Masters. They awaken only when we call them. We three, or the Masters." Sterling moved forward, his steps slow but deliberate, his breathing shallow. He was close now, close to the source of this dark, twisted evil. He had to be. "More than life, they give us for what we do," Morvan continued, his voice rich with a sense of twisted satisfaction. "Yeah, centuries ago, pirates used this island for refuge. They died and left their treasure in this castle. It lies in the room where the Masters lie, and we three receive payment in gold and gems. Tonight I receive my pay, and tomorrow I leave on the Nostromo. Oh, and, you go with me." Sterling's heart lurched in his chest, but the words that followed nearly made him lose his composure. Isadora's voice answered him, cool and unyielding, filled with the kind of scorn that Sterling had always admired in her. Even in this situation, she would not cower. "So, I go with you, do I?" she sneered. "I'd rather climb the stairs with the rest of your victims than have anything to do with you, you monster. I tell you, when Sterling Radcliffe finds you..." "Radcliffe." Morvan's voice was sharp, a cold sneer cutting through it. "He'll do nothing. I'll find him, and he'll wish he could climb the stairs of blood. And as for you, you will go with me, and like it. A drop of my blood in your veins, and you will belong to the Master as I do." Sterling could almost feel the vile presence of Morvan's grip on her, suffocating her resistance. It was unbearable. Yeah, we shall attend to that, but first there is something else, something more pleasant. The words slipped from Morvan's mouth like a promise of torment as he fell into a sickening purr. Sterling's blood ran cold, his vision narrowing with rage and dread. He could stand it no more. His steps quickened. The hallway stretched out before him, its darkness pressing in from every side, but his focus never wavered. He had to reach her. But then, a scream, piercing, frantic, cut through the silence. Isadora's scream. Sterling launched himself forward, his body fueled by nothing but desperate, burning need to save her. He moved with a speed that felt as if the very ground beneath him was shifting in haste to keep up. His heart pounded in his chest, and he didn't even notice the throbbing pain in his skull as he raced forward. He reached the threshold of the room just in time to see the horror before him. Isadora lay on an ancient bed, her body bound at the wrists and ankles, the leather thongs tight against her skin, holding her to the 4 tall bedposts. Only the torn remnants of her undergarments clung to her, covering the curves of her body. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her defiance still shone through. And there, crouched over her, was Lucien Morvan. He was caressing the soft pink flesh of her thigh, his hands moving with deliberate, sickening slowness. His face was twisted in perverse delight as Isadora writhed beneath him, her body jerking with the futile attempts to free herself. She screamed again, her voice filled with terror and loathing, but Morvan's laughter cut through the air like a blade. Sterling's breath caught in his throat once more, and his entire body seemed to freeze in that moment. His vision blurred with rage, his heart was thundering in his chest, but then a deep, guttural growl, the anger inside him erupted, surging like a tidal wave, and he charged forward. Sterling growled deep in his throat as he sprang, every muscle in his body coiling with fury and strength. Morvan spun around, his eyes wide with panic, but he was too slow to escape the force of Sterling's powerful lunge. One hand closed around Morvan's thin neck, the other, a rock-like fist, made a bloody ruin of Morvan's mouth before he could even react. Howling with pain, Morvan retaliated, trying to sink his teeth into Sterling's arm. But Sterling, with a growl that matched the depth of his rage, flung Morvan aside, his movements as fluid as a seasoned fighter. Morvan crashed into the far wall, scrambling to get to his feet, cringing as he tried to avoid the wrath of the man who'd stalked him with a deadly focus. Sterling advanced, his body moving with a practiced grace. Morvan, now yellow with fear, darted around the bed and ran, scrambling into the hallway with the desperation of a rat. At the door, Sterling halted, forced to check his pursuit. His mind, for the moment, clung to reason. Morvan could easily vanish into the labyrinth of passages, and he'd have no chance of catching him now. His first priority was Isadora's safety. He turned back to her, his heart pounding in his chest as he returned to her side. Isadora looked up at him, her face alight with a look of pure relief and gratitude. It was enough to almost break Sterling. With a choked cry, he flung himself to his knees beside the bed, his lips crashing down on hers in a desperate kiss. The warmth and softness of her was all he needed to remind him of the world he was fighting for. For several moments they clung together, and then, reluctantly, Sterling straightened up, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and he managed a shaky laugh. "We've got to get out of here, sweetheart," he said, his voice strained but firm. "I'm not afraid of Morvan, but he knows things about this place we don't. And after you're safe on that yacht, I'm coming back for him." His eyes scanned the room, frantically searching for something to cut her bonds. Above the bed, crossed on the wall, hung a pair of menacing-looking machetes. Sterling snatched one from its mountings and wrenched it free. With a swift motion, he drew the blade through the ropes that held her. They snapped easily under the pressure, and Isadora was free. "Oh God, your clothing," Sterling began, his eyes momentarily lingering on her bare, almost nude form. Isadora's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she pointed mutely toward a pile of tattered rags on the floor. Her eyes blazed with fury. "God damn it, he ripped them from me." Sterling's jaw clenched with disgust. His face twisted with a deep scowl as he surveyed the room. Oh, this wasn't just a dungeon. It was a throne room, a mockery of royalty. The furnishings were opulent and ancient, and had clearly been looted over centuries of violence and plunder. No period or taste guided this chamber. Instead, it was a manifestation of greed and darkness, an eternal reminder of the horrors that had been carried out here. But the thing that most disturbed him was the overpowering air of unease. It wasn't just the grim furnishings, but the very essence of the place. Each item imbued a sense of deadness, as though it had never known the light of the living. Sterling moved toward a tapestry, hoping to cover Isadora with something. But before he could even reach it, she stopped him, a shudder passing through her. "No, Sterling," she whispered, her voice tight with disgust. "It's too much like grave clothes. Everything about this place makes my flesh crawl. I'd rather stay as I am than touch any of it." Sterling nodded. The last thing he wanted was for her to touch anything that felt so cursed. "Okay, let's go then." They hurried through the dark corridors toward the stairway, Sterling holding the machete with the readiness of a man expecting more danger to come. They moved quickly, and as they passed the room where the Nostromo's passengers were held, Isadora's gaze flicked toward it. She stopped and whispered, her voice filled with dread. "I saw them before," she murmured. "It's awful." Sterling kept moving, his heart pounding, his senses tingling with the awareness that danger still loomed. They climbed the stairs to the great hall, Sterling leading the way. His every instinct was on high alert, every muscle tensed in preparation for the next threat. It doesn't seem right," he muttered uneasily. "We should have heard from Morvan by now." And then they did hear from him. From the maze of tunnels came the sound of Morvan's accursed horn. The note, that same tone of sleep, rippled through the air, winding itself into their minds, insidious and suffocating. Sterling felt his steps falter, his body growing heavy, his senses dulled as the cursed sound swirled around them like a fog, numbing his thoughts and slowing his limbs. He felt Isadora stumble beside him, her body going slack as the heavy weight of the horn's call reached them. Oh, he fought it, fighting for control, his hand gripping her arm desperately. "Come on, hurry," he shouted, though his own voice seemed far away in the haze of sleep. "We have to get out. Ah, damn him." Isadora rallied for a moment, a hand gripping his in return, and together they pushed onward. The fog clung to their every step, the dreamlike lethargy pulling them down. But they fought, inching toward the top of the stairs. They crossed the wide expanse of the hall, each step feeling like a battle, each footfall heavier than the last. The horrible droning from the horn seemed to follow them, piercing their skulls with its oppressive weight. But in the end, it was too much. Their muscles betrayed them, their movements slowing until they could do nothing but collapse onto the stone-cold floor. The world seemed to spin away as they sank into the dark oblivion of sleep. Sterling paused only long enough to catch his breath, the clammy air of the cave still clinging to his lung mold. His shirt was torn, plastered with sweat, his fingers slick with rust and blood. But his mind was fixed on Isadora, and on the fiend who had taken her. Oh, the castle loomed ahead, its crumbling towers etched in the moonlight like the fingers of a corpse clawing at the sky. Sterling tore across the plain, flitting between the ghastly silhouettes of the skeleton trees. Somewhere in the distance, a low droning wail rose and fell. It might have been the wind, or it might have been something else. He entered the castle through the yawning archway, weapon in hand. Shadows slithered along the walls, seeming to flee his approach. Sterling ignored them, sprinting up the worn stone stairway, retracing the path to the great hall where he'd last seen Isadora. The chamber was empty. A trail of disturbed dust led to one of the tapestry-covered walls, torn slightly at the corner. He ripped it aside and saw a narrow spiral stair descending into darkness. From the depths below came a dim, pulsating light, greenish and unnatural. Sterling gritted his teeth and descended. Each step down felt colder than the last, as though the air itself had recoiled from what lay beneath. The green glow intensified, flickering like a swamp fire, and at last the stairs ended in a low, vaulted chamber. And there in the center lay Isadora, chained to a black altar of stone. Lucien Morvan stood over her, arms raised. He held a dagger curved like a serpent's fang, and his eyes, burning like twin coals, were fixed not on Isadora but on a great mirror behind the altar. It pulsed with the same eerie green as the chamber, and its surface rippled like water, though no breeze stirred. "Ah, you're just in time," Morvan said without turning. His voice echoed oddly, as if the mirror had answered him itself. Sterling didn't wait for another word. With a shout, he charged. Morvan spun, the dagger flashing in the green light. Steel met steel as Sterling brought his machete up, the clang echoing through the chamber like the toll of doom. They fought furiously, the mirror pulsing behind them, whispering in tongues not meant for the world of men. "You're too late," Morvan snarled, ducking under Sterling's swing. "The gate is open." Sterling roared and drove the machete into Morvan's side. Oh, the sorcerer staggered, eyes wide with pain and fury. But even as blood spilled, he laughed. The mirror behind him boiled and flared. "No!" Isadora cried. "Destroy it, Sterling. The mirror. He's drawn them through." Sterling turned just as Morvan collapsed, a rictus grin frozen on his face. The mirror's glow now spilled across the altar like liquid emerald. Shapes writhed inside, faces, claws, wings, and then something began to emerge. With all his strength, Sterling lifted the weapon and brought it crashing down on the glass. Oh, the mirror shrieked. A shockwave of light and noise burst outward, hurling Sterling across the room. For a moment, there was only silence, and then blackness. Part 5. The End of the Island. Sterling didn't even blink. He stepped over the twitching corpse, blocking out the chaos erupting around him. Screams, pounding footsteps, the mindless rush of the vampire swarming down the steps, tossing aside the dazed prisoners. Calmly, methodically, he bent over the body and pried a gleaming silver horn from Morvan's stiffening fingers. Then he lifted it to his lips. The undead horde was nearly upon him. Their eyes were blazing, blades raised high, when Sterling raised the silver horn and blew the first note. A low, mournful sound echoed through the hall, dissonant, otherworldly, the note of sleep. It wasn't quite right, though, so he blew again, desperately. This time the note was perfect, and the effect was immediate. As the sound washed over the approaching swarm, they froze mid-charge. Then, before his stunned eyes, their bodies wavered and dissolved. One by one, they faded into ash and mist, vanishing as though they'd never existed. But Sterling had no time to celebrate. The 5 figures in blood-red robes remained. Now they moved forward, unarmed, yet far more terrifying than any blade. There was power in them. Power no living man could hope to match, and his chest tightened. They halted at the base of the stairs, forming a broad half-circle. The one in the center, the master, lifted his arms in a gesture that radiated menace. His lips moved in a silent chant, and though Sterling could hear no sound, he felt the change in the air. Something was rising. The shadows deepened. A freezing pressure settled over him like a cloak of black ice. His joints locked, his muscles seized, and the cold air reached for his heart, numbing it. Sterling strained against the paralysis. Every step he took was a battle, every moment agony. Still he forced himself forward, 1 inch at a time, toward the crimson-robed demon. And then the world exploded. The first blast ripped through the castle with a roar that shattered the silence. Fire and smoke belched from the corridor, blasting stone and debris into the air. Sterling was thrown off his feet, flung like a rag doll against the far wall. The silver horn and his blade were torn from his grasp and clattered across the floor. He hit the stone hard, the wind knocked from his lungs. For a moment everything was noise and heat and disorientation. Then slowly, the sound returned. The explosion had blown the wax plugs from his ears. He staggered upright, disoriented but alive, and around him the chaos was total. The formerly enslaved humans lay strewn about the floor, unconscious or worse. His eyes darted to Isadora. She was there, moving, slowly getting to her feet, and relief flooded through him. But where were those robed figures? There. They were retreating, fleeing into the smoking remains of the passage. At first Sterling didn't understand, and then it hit him. The blast must have destroyed their crypts, their resting places, unleashing flame and ruin where they once slept. And now, with their tombs shattered and fire raging, they were panicking. Even creatures of darkness feared death when it came with finality. Shaking off the pain, Sterling crossed to Isadora. She looked up, and recognition flickered in her eyes just before she collapsed against him, sobbing. He held her tightly. Then another blast tore through the chamber. The floor erupted beneath them, slabs of stone heaving upward as though the castle itself were buckling in agony. Sterling held on as the ground beneath his feet rippled like water. With a deafening crack, part of the stone stairs collapsed, vanishing into a yawning chasm. The hideous altar, its ghastly fire still flickering, dropped into the pit and disappeared. For a few terrifying seconds, the ground shook violently, and everything stilled. Sterling blinked, stunned. That much destruction, no amount of gunpowder could have caused that. And then he knew. It wasn't just an explosion. The blast had been triggered by something deeper. An earthquake. The very rock beneath the castle was shifting, collapsing, and the whole island was coming apart. And it deserved to. But they had to escape fast. Sterling's strength surged. Still clutching Isadora, he forced his way toward the shattered door, staggering through the rubble-strewn hall. Somehow they made it to the outside stairs. The forest of dead trees writhed in the gale, creaking like the timbers of a sinking ship. Wind screamed in from the sea, tearing brittle branches loose and sending them spinning like knives. Sterling pressed forward, shielding Isadora as best he could. And he reached the crevice in the cliff wall. The galley still floated in the inlet, groaning on the rising tide. He crossed the narrow deck with the last of his strength and collapsed onto the safety of the Nostromo. Minutes later, the diesel engines rumbled to life. Slowly, they crept out through the narrow channel, slipping into the open sea. Behind them, the island of the damned crumbled into ruin. 10 minutes later, the accursed Isle of the Undead was vanishing into the past behind them. Isadora had dressed, and now she sat beside Sterling in the pilot house. One of his arms was wrapped protectively around her shoulders, the other steady on the wheel. And so, she murmured, her voice hushed by memory, while Morvan was dragging you to that awful wreck of a boat, I managed to wriggle free. We hadn't tied the knots tightly. I slipped my hands loose. I needed to hide, and I could think only of one place where he might not search. I ran to that chamber, the one with the others. I undressed and lay down among them, pretended I was one of them. God, it was horrible, the way they fed on each other's wounds. Sterling pressed his fingers gently against her lips. Don't, he said, low and sharp. Just forget it, all of it. It's gone now. It's over. She searched his face for a moment, and then nodded. Yeah, I'll try. They turned their eyes toward the receding black smear on the horizon. For all the horrors they'd witnessed, luck had truly been with them. An earthquake bringing down this island of fear. The earth beneath that hellish place was still heaving, its final death throes sending up plumes of dust and steam. As they watched, the towering rock shaped like a bleached skull cracked and split, and slid silently into the sea. From the sundered land, tongues of purging fire leapt skyward. Only one jagged wall of the castle remained, silhouetted against the flame-lit sky. A single window glowed there, crimson and baleful. A square, bloody moon in a sky painted with blood. But then it too collapsed and was gone. Sterling turned away first and pulled Isadora closer. Their lips met, soft and wordless. And the Nostromo, her engines humming, drove steadily through the white-capped waters, carrying them away from this nightmare, toward safety, toward silence, together. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that one. That was a lot of fun. Kind of old school style writing, but, in a modern way as well. Whatever I'm talking about, I don't know. Okay, thanks to everybody who's been, leaving comments and stuff of support. Yeah, YouTube is messing around with the algorithm and it's going nuts, and it's really, I don't know what the hell's going on, but I still love doing this as much as ever, and I can guarantee you I will still be here for all of you who love a good tale. So thanks to the author for that one, Margot Holloway, another interesting tale. So those of you who've been hankering for a bit of vampire action, that was kind of, they were there, weren't they? But there was also the undead, whatever, so bit of something for everyone, I would like to think. Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Back on my second channel tomorrow night with a podcast. I'm back again here on Wednesday with something a little different, but more of the same as well. Anyway, enough for me for one evening. Did all that recording in one go, and my brain's not working too well right now. Till the next time, my dear friends, you'll sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.